the start line Curtis White hit from the
is razendsnel in dat trappen.
And ready to go here in Brazen, and we are underway. Van der Poel alongside Curtis White, Tonart right alongside him, and it's the American that gets a whole shot.
Dat was ronde 1 en op de laatste.
The coffee tasted good this morning. He's got a new podcast, In the Red. To see him with such a great start today, I know a lot of American fans are going to be really pumped by this.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back In the Red. We're here after an exciting weekend of racing in Northampton, Massachusetts. A lot of exciting things to talk about. We had a really awesome field, awesome course, great racing. Yeah, let's dive into it. Tony, how's everything going?
I'm great, man. I'm really excited to hear about the racing. I wasn't able to watch it. I did, though. Before we start talking about your racing, I want to just backtrack to last episode just a little bit, because we recorded the day that Clara won at the Koppenberg. And it was like a couple hours after. I didn't know even that she'd won yet. You were trying not to spoil it, but I've watched it since. And holy cow. Like, I don't think we gave it the credit that it deserved in the last episode because it had just happened, but I just want to make sure that that's at the front. Like, that was just an absolutely amazing performance. And that was so exciting.
Yeah. How cool was that? I mean, it was just, how iconic that race is. And then just watching how Clara was able to race that race. She's such a strong rider, a very composed rider, and she's made a lot of gains technically. And with her, she's really upped her game, and to be able to compete with the best in the world on one of the hardest tracks in European cyclocross or international cyclocross, that was just so cool to see. And even that, like, the battle between her and Denise in the last couple laps, she was holding her own. There were points where Denise was trying to come up, or Chopper trying to come on the inside of some of those corners, and Clara was holding her own. She didn't back off at all.
All right. Not only she holds her own, she kicked her butt, and that was really awesome. I mean, it was so exciting. It was my favorite race of the season so far. It was so fun to watch. So we weren't able to really go into it last time because of just the timing of the recording, but it was exciting. And then it got me thinking, though, because since Fayetteville, they have acquired Walmart as a sponsor, right? I don't think they had the sponsorship before the World Cup, but they have the Walmart sponsorship now, from what I understand. And I know the course wasn't really a big hit for everybody. So I think based on Clara's performance, what they should be doing is taking that Walmart money that they got, and they should be making that course stupid hard, like a giant hill. I think they just raced something called Trash Hill. So like the hill was made out of trash, right? We can make it out of money with Walmart. So we can have Money Hill. And if we can make that course really hard, we can crown a U.S. world champion on U.S. soil. So I imagine they're listening to the podcast right now, and they're going to get started on that right away. That's my pitch. Let's make that course really hard.
Waltons, you heard it here. Let's get on it.
U.S. world champ.
I think you're onto something, Tony.
I think so. They probably already started. It's a good idea. I'm sure they probably thought of it.
Yeah, I'm sure they're well ahead of us on that. But it's, starting with Koppenberg, I guess starting with Overice, then Koppenberg, then the European Championships. Like, looking at the European racing, unfortunately, Clara wasn't able to race the European Championships, but that was another hard course with a cobblestone climb. Like, it was just it seems like the courses over there right now are they're really solid, very difficult courses. And right now with the Cannondale Cyclocross team, we're splitting the squad right now. I'm staying domestic up through the national championships and then going to Europe. Right now we have Clara and Katie Klaus over in Europe with our mechanics, Gary Wolf and Mike Barry. They're in Sittard, Netherlands right now. Our setup is there, and they're getting everything good to go. They're going to be racing all the way up to the national championships. They're going to come back to Chicago for that, and then we're all going back over in December. So we're splitting the squad right now, and right now they're doing a really good job over in Europe. And then, Stu and we're holding our own here in the U.S.
Yeah, I think Lucinda Brand's lucky that Clara couldn't race this weekend. That's all. Otherwise, she might not have that second jersey that she's not going to wear, at least for a while.
Who was it? What was it? The Slow Ride podcast? They had some joke going on during the Tour de France, I think, where they were intentionally, by the way, there was some sarcasm with this, but including some of the Canadians in with, celebrating the 4th of July, I think. There's some joke about that, but I was waiting for them to come out with a facetious tweet about, why isn't Clara in the European Championships?
Yeah. That sounds about right then. They got layers and layers of jokes, that's for sure.
I know they seem to nail it every other show because I always enjoy listening, or I have been enjoying listening to them more recently.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. It's a good show. I'm a fan, definitely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your racing. You had an exciting race weekend as well. We didn't get to watch it. It wasn't televised anywhere, broadcast anywhere, which we're getting a little spoiled, I guess, now that we're so far in the season, and I get to say that. So I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's the beginning of November, and for me, this is the second weekend of racing that we didn't have broadcasting for.
So it's good. It's a good sign for the future, right? Hopefully, eventually we'll have all of it broadcast, but it's a good sign.
Yep. Yeah, but this is the Northampton International. Really is it's a New England classic. It's been around for 30 years. Adam Ireson has put on this event he started in 1991, I believe it is. And to do anything for 30 years that's a feat in and of itself. But the first year that I did this race, I went back and saw the results. It was 2005. I was 10 years old. That was the first year I was racing, and my first edition of the CycloSmart International in Northampton. And it's been really cool to be a part of a scene for that long and a part of a community for that long. But to year after year be coming to these races and seeing the same faces there, and to see how the races progress, but also my friends or my competitors or the people in the community, or seeing who's coming and going, and then just to climb through the ranks. I remember being a Cub Junior and looking up to the Jesse Anthonys and the Mark McCormicks who were winning the races back then, and going to get their autograph. And it was a big deal whenever they would give me the time of day, just a minute of their time for a picture or an autograph or just to say hi. And then now I'm in that position where I'm at the front of these elite races, and then there's all these Cub Juniors there. And the New England cyclocross scene has always done a very good job with promoting youth development with their cyclocross races. They have really good kid races, the Cub Juniors, and they had a really interesting schedule format with, now they have the UCI Junior Women race that they have to have. So they had an entire window dedicated to junior women, and then an entire window dedicated to junior men. So all of the Cub Juniors, the 15, 16s, and the UCI Junior Women all started in the same window, which is kind of unique, because if you're a young Cub Junior, you're looking at kind of the progression is right in front of you. Where are you going to be in the next 4 or 5 years? They're right in front of you. They're in the starting line right in front of you, and you can physically see a faster wheel in front of you and kind of aspire to that level. And I think it's really cool that they got their own window and their own opportunity to compete on the course and really push themselves and be with their peers, because it can be really intimidating as a young athlete if you're in that under 16, 10 to 16 range, and you're racing against grown adults and they're seeming twice your size. It can be intimidating at times. So that's the thing that we're lacking in US cyclocross, is large amounts of juniors being around a large number of their peers, really. So it was really cool to see that format, I thought.
When you raced it at 10, what did it look like then? Did you have was it building a large group of kids then still, or was it much thinner?
There was still a really solid group, because there was always really good communication of where the next races were. All the local clubs were involved in having their own setups at these races, and there was really good communication within the community. And it was a traveling circus, so we always saw the same people at all the races, and there was a good amount of Cub Juniors or 15, 16s at these races. And back then we were starting with some of the amateur fields, whether it be the Cat 3-4 men, or I think the faster juniors were starting with the 35 plus masters, which is a really good mix, because that's good depth and aggressive racing for that regional level. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious to see how, if more races adopt this model of giving all the juniors their own window, I'm curious to see how that model works across other races.
Yeah, you and I were talking about that, as well as kind of even coming down another age group. Because my older daughter's 4.5, and trying to take her to some events here and be a part of it. It's like, what do you do for the kids who are under 10? And that's one component where, if you look at other sports, all youth sports, we start kids in those younger ages. Little League Baseball is a great example that we've had generations and generations of. I grew up in Little League Baseball for sure. We had generations of that, and that's part of the reason that the sports are so strong in this country is we're not starting to play it at 30 years old or 25 years old. So point being is, what do we do with these events for kids under 10? And we tried a little thing here with a small race that I worked at Labor Day weekend, I think it was. I bought some of the backyardy jumps and teeter totters and stuff that this company makes. They're a really cool company. They do really nice stuff. And we bought a few of their pieces, and we took it and we set it up, and it made a little skills course for the kids. We had a couple barriers, some teeter totters, some whoops that are made out of little rollers. And the little kids could just ride them all day, just as like a little sort of bike park loop while they were watching the other races. And then they had races for 9 and up. And they did have a kids race where all the little kids could ride the full course. So my daughter and I rode the full course. And then she spent the rest of the day with the other kids, some of them on balance bikes, some of them on pedal bikes, just ripping around in that. And we thought that was a pretty cool model. Like, it was something that the kids seemed to enjoy. So I'm wondering if you've seen anything where people have tried to be creative and create something particularly for that younger group. And then I'm wondering if people listening have any examples. Maybe they can send us some photos or something that they did, and you could share them through your story or your social media a little bit too, to kind of help spread the word of like, what do we do to create something fun that invests kids under 10 at some of these events?
Yeah, I think something that I've always seen at the New England or the Northeast cyclocross races, and something that I think at some point I took for granted, was the attention that they gave to these kid races, where they would, during the UCI course pre-ride, all the pros are on the course pre-riding or warming up. And then on the infield, they have a smaller course for juniors, 5 to 10 years old or whatever. And they would break it down into age groups, and they had their own little course, and they had their time where, a cyclocross race is a family atmosphere. You bring your entire family to watch and interact with the racers, or your kids to jump into these kid races. And that's something that I think a lot of these races in the Northeast have, because I grew up in the scene, it was something that was very prevalent to me, that there was always attention given to a kids race during the day, whether it was during the UCI pre-ride. It was something that was always there. And I've traveling around to Baltimore or Rochester, a number of these races I think we should be giving more attention to these younger kids races, just to have that infrastructure for them to be a part of it, because it's sometimes a little bit difficult to understand if you're that young and there's a professional athlete in front of you, kind of what's the gravity of that, and how long have they been in the sport, and what are the things that they've accomplished, and their personalities, and how you're able to relate to them, and what's it like to have a picture with them. But if you're able to tie that experience of, you have your own course, you're having fun, if you win a medal, or in Northampton, we were winning giant cookies. By the way, I wonder how many people have actually tagged Phil Guyman this weekend. I feel like this is the one weekend every year you have these people who don't tag Phil Guyman, and then one weekend a year you have all these floods of mentions just like flooding his timeline. I'm sure he's very active on social media, and he interacts with a lot of people, but there has to be a massive spike in his interactions online. Just as one weekend.
I bet. Yeah.
Hey, Phil, where are you? You're not in Northampton? This is where the cookies are.
That is a big cookie. I did see the picture that I think it was that Cannondale tweeted with you in the cookie, and then Gage is like in the background, and it looks like he's just like staring at the cookie. Like he's just upset about not having that cookie. I don't know. Did you share any of that big cookie with him, or would you eat it in front of him?
Yeah, I ate it in front of him.
Really slowly?
Well, I think he was upset because he got a cookie that was smaller than mine.
Oh, they give a smaller cookie? That's awesome. I like that. That is.
No, it was the winner gets the biggest cookie, and then the smaller cookies for second and third. And
I like that.
It's really unique how the Northampton race kind of interacts with local businesses or the local community, and kind of they get everyone involved in some level. And it's a unique feature that they have. And it's something that people remember. It's part of the experience there.
Yeah, definitely. So one note on the kids thing, and then I want to talk about the racing, is you talk about the level of attention to it. And I think that's really important. But one thing I would say that I've learned the last couple years, and I've put on races for a long time, a lot more road than cyclocross, but I did kids races on criteriums and things, but I never thought about it the same way until I had a kid. And what I realized with my daughter and teaching her to ride is that a lot of times at some of these cyclocross races, they have like a little grass loop that they made out of tape, something really short, and they just throw the kids in there and they do a couple laps, then everybody cheers, then they give them all, you know, something, which is nice. And but it's kind of ceremonial. It's not really developing any skill. It's just putting them out there to put them out there. And for my kid, she's like, I don't want to do that. Like, she's like, one, that doesn't feel like a real race. Like, she watches real racing on TV and in person. And two, it's not fun for kids to ride on grass. It's super hard, especially for a little kid. Like, they can't really move very well on the grass. So it's more frustrating than anything. So if you're looking at developing kids courses, personally, I want to see things that are skill building and challenging, but also fun. You know, a lot of different types of terrains to ride over, maybe a little more pavement than you'd have in a traditional cyclocross course, but you're talking about a 5-year-old and the pavement's fast. So it's a little more fun.
The one thing I
just
did
throw
see,
that out there.
I believe they had like a barrier type obstacle in the Northampton kids race, but it was like a hay bale. So it was something,
Yeah.
I mean, something you kind of, you carry your bike over and you have to climb over this thing, but it was a feature. So yeah, I get what you're saying. But
Like
it's
mountain bike court,
we
like
want it
mountain
to be
bike trail or
creative.
something. Yeah, but something that's like they can really ride and have fun riding. They don't want to run and push their bikes. Like, I know that's part of cyclocross, but that's not fun when you're 5. You know, like, they want to ride on dirt, they want to ride on pavement, they want to ride on something that will move them along in the race and actually be able to ride their bikes. And I think a lot of times those little short grass courses don't cut it that way. I also don't think it's making them better riders where they could be learning something that weekend as they're around other people. So, and I don't know the answer to that by any means. It's more of a question of how can we do that and where can we create that just so kids are more into it.
More kids on bikes. That's what we want.
That's right. All right. Speaking of kids on bikes, let's talk about big kids on bikes. I kind of want to talk about Sunday first, just because it looked more exciting. But do we have to go in chronological order? Because I saw the photo.
Let's start Saturday, because I think there are some really there's some cool lessons that we learned from Sunday or Saturday, and there's some things that the roles were reversed Saturday to Sunday. So we can talk about.
Well, hurry up,
first.
because I want to hear about Sunday.
Okay, all right, Tony.
I'm just kidding. Let's
I know,
talk
it's
about Saturday.
all of a sudden we got one race weekend without broadcasting, and you're getting wicked impatient on me. Come
I'm
on.
anxious. I saw the sprint photo. You got this like crazy look on your face. Gage has got this look. It looks awesome. It was a sweet picture. So I want to hear the story behind it. But let's talk about Saturday first. Let's build the anticipation here.
Right, we're gonna build the anticipation here, exactly. So Saturday, for those people who haven't been to Northampton, it's kind of your typical grass crit type of course. There's two kind of elevation levels. You have this inner field, very wide sweeping corners. The course is pretty wide. The minimum course width for a UCI race is 3 meters, but there are plenty parts of the course that are wider than that, which is really cool because it caters to more group racing, and you have that washer machine effect where the group can move around and there are people constantly changing and fighting for position. You have a steeper hill that goes up to this higher level part of the course. It's kind of like a plateau up into this woods, and there's a lot of rocks and roots up there, and it's more technical flowing, and line choice is very important there, and the group really funnels down. So where you can go through some corners 3 wide in the lower field, once you go up the side of this hill, it's single file. So there's this accordion effect with the group, and that really helps break apart the race. If you're on the front, you're able to pin it for a couple minutes, and then it just that the rider behind and the rider behind, they have to accelerate a little bit harder until all of a sudden the effort's too much for that one wheel. So that helped break up the race, and it made it pretty interesting. Saturday, also, one thing to note is that we had a pretty strong field here. Really, the only 2 riders we were missing were Eric Bruner and Kerry Warner. So we had a really fast front row, and there were a lot of riders who were starting really well and really wanted to show face and be a part of that front group. We had Scott McGill and Gage Heck that were teammates that were playing the teammate card in the first lap of Saturday. Scott McGill was off the front. Brandon Fix, I believe, started to bring back that move. After the first lap, it was a group of 4. We sat up, we regrouped, and all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, it was a group of 10. Just with that moment of hesitation, it was a group of 4, and 6 more riders came up, and everyone wanted to be in the top 2. So we had this right after the first lap, we had this 90-second stretch of There's reshuffling in the group. There were elbows being thrown, handlebars we were banging, and it was just there was some I'll say aggressive energy in the group. Because everyone was nervous. That was their time to get to the front. If you had a bad start, that was your time to really correct those mistakes. And there were a couple crashes in that 90-second window. And it just, in my head, there were bells ringing, lights were flashing. I said, all right, I gotta remove myself from this situation. I need to be towards the front of this and just kind of stay out of trouble. I was able to fight for position and get to the front of the group. And we went up into the higher level of the course, into this wood section. There were a couple tight technical turns, and I heard a crash behind me. It was probably the third crash in a 90-second window. And it's when you hear something like that happen in cyclocross, everyone looks out for themselves. It's an advantage. You rode a section cleaner than the guy behind you, and you hit it.
That's one of my favorite things about cyclocross.
And then you figure out who it was.
I love that you attack on crashes. None of this waiting, letting people regroup, road race stuff. Like, get out and get some. I love it.
Well, a part of it is that you're able to ride a section cleaner than someone else, or whether they made a mistake or they weren't technically proficient enough, or they overextended. You never know what happened, but you all of a sudden have the advantage, and that could easily happen to you in the next corner. So you need to kind of make hay while the sun's shining. And I got a gap briefly, and I had no idea who slipped behind me. All I knew that there was a gap. I didn't know if it was a couple wheels behind me. It was just enough to open up the pace a little bit. A couple corners later, I found out that was Gage that actually slipped, and he went back from second wheel to fifth wheel, I believe. So he was the one who now had to chase, and the gap wasn't big. It was maybe a 5-second gap, but it was enough where he had to get back to position and start driving the pace to close the gap. And the gap slowly went out from there. I felt like I was able to run very consistent laps. I was able to ride technically proficient, run a very clean race. And I was able to hold the gap all the way to the end. So it was more of a time trial diesel effort on the first day. I was very happy with the form. Gage finished second, Scott McGill third. He landed on the podium. It was a pretty dynamic race behind, which was really exciting, I think, for the fans to watch. But it really teed things up really well for Sunday's race.
All right. Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, like I said, all we saw was the results. I was sitting in my tree stand bow hunting, refreshing the Substack constantly, trying to see when the results would come up. So both days, actually. So I saw both of them while I was up there. So I was excited to see the big gap on Saturday.
Yeah, well, there are a few people that said, yeah, it looked easy. I was like, yeah, I'm glad it looked easy, because it definitely didn't feel it. Because Gage is such a strong rider that he can close just about any gap. So if you have any advantage, you know he's going to be coming, and there's a good chance that he could bring it back. But we're going to Sunday's race, and we were very evenly matched. He was on form. He was making all the right decisions. He was riding very good technically. And it made for a very exciting and dynamic race. And, talking about how in cyclocross, if you hear a mistake behind you, whether it's a slip of gears or someone unclips a pedal, or if it's a crash and you up the pace, that happened in the first lap Sunday, but it happened to me. So the roles were totally reversed. Gage was just in front of me. We started well. It was a fast start. I believe, sitting fourth or fifth wheel. Gage was a couple wheels in front of me. I slid out in a tight technical bit. I was off the bike. I was able to recover very quickly, but it was enough where perhaps Gage, or the rider in front, heard the mistake and upped the pace. And all of a sudden, it was an 8-second gap to Gage. Gage was off the front, the responsibility fell on me to chase, because I was one of the stronger riders in the group, and I had to close that gap. And that's the unique part about cyclocross, where yes, you need to take advantage of these moments, because it could just very easily happen to you at any given moment. So that's the exciting part about this sport. And so for the next couple laps,
I know we talked about this before, and but it always impresses me, and I was thinking about it when I was watching some of the European races this weekend too, that I think we'll get to a little later in the show. But it always impresses me how composed cyclocross racers are through really difficult crashes and mechanical issues, nobody seems to get frustrated. I mean, I'm sure there's frustration at some point, but it's like you guys go in and you have these crashes and you have, these different issues and you lose ground. Somebody gets in your way on something that, maybe on something you couldn't control. And it doesn't ever look like anybody's ever flustered about that. Like everybody's just sort of keeps going. Does it take a certain personality, or is it time or experience that gets that, or do we just not see the frustration? But I mean, I'll be throwing my bike half the time sometimes when I see these things. Like it looks really frustrating at times, and you guys just roll with it.
Well, it takes experience, maturity, and composure.
All things I don't
and
have,
experience.
So that's why.
It really, but it's maybe the junior Curtis, who made a mistake would have reacted a bit differently. But you have to be composed, because if you're not composed, that's when you start to make mistakes. If you start to have this flagrant expediency that you're trying to ride with, you're going to blow out a corner, or especially on the Northampton course, on the top level of this course, there are a lot of rocks and roots that you had to be very careful about where you were placing your wheels and what lines you were choosing and how you were setting up for the next corner or the corner after that. You had to think a couple steps ahead of you. So you had to piece together a couple sections or a couple corners to really be proficient to make up time. So you didn't have this, I'm going to close the gap in this section here, and I'm going to get back to Gage. It had to be a lap and a half effort. And that was a concerted effort. I believe it took a lap and a half to get back up to Gage. And it was a big effort because he's a very strong rider, and he was, he was riding a clean race. So I had to be just a little bit better in all these sections to make up the difference.
And you could just piece that together. You're composing up and you're going, okay, I know it's going to take a little bit, but I'm just going to piece it here, kind of, eating the elephant one small bite at a time, so to speak. Is that the expression?
And another thing that I noticed on the start line was that I chose to go with a file tread tire, 2627 PSI, Challenge Dune. And I saw that Gage was running a Grifo. So slightly more aggressive tread. He had more traction through a lot of the corners, but that meant I had a little bit less rolling resistance on the straightaways. But through the technical sections, I trusted my ability, where I was able to really find traction and handle the bike well through the single track sections through the woods, or be able to choose my lines carefully. But I think the one thing that I found on Sunday was that the course was a little bit more slick, and we had daylight savings Saturday night or early Sunday morning. So the sun was setting an hour earlier on Sunday. So when we're racing we started at 3:15. So about the time it got to 4 o'clock, the sun's going on the other side of the trees. It's darker. We're in the shade, and it felt like the temperature dropped, and there was like a light dew that kind of settled onto the grass or on the ground. So it made some of these turns a little bit more slick later in the race. So with the file treads, if I'm trying to press it through some of these technical sections, I felt like I had a little bit less traction than I did in the first couple laps. So that was another element that I felt like I had to deal with. So it was, how do you alter your riding style to accommodate the changing conditions? Now, it only changed by 1% or 2%, but it was enough where at that level you do notice it.
That's interesting. Is that something you anticipated? I know you think about potentially changing conditions, but daylight savings is kind of a unique example. Did you anticipate it getting darker earlier and that dew coming on?
Not really, no, because that's something we only deal with once a year, and it's such a slight change. It wasn't like a storm system came in at this hour, and like in Cincinnati, where we saw a little storm cell come in 30 minutes into the race, and it flash of rain, and that changed the course enough. We didn't see that. It wasn't like a storm cell that came in, or a little rain, or this, the wind direction changed. It was just, it was a very, very small difference, but it was something that I was able to pick up, that I think that if I started with a Grifo tire, it wouldn't have affected me as much. Whereas I made the choice to start on a file tread, that faster tire. And I felt it in the last couple laps. So I had to kind of adjust how I was racing the course and how I was going to race Gage in the end.
Interesting. So how does the sprint play out? We know it comes down to 1 second difference. I saw the photo. You come across the line. You got this expression of pure joy, almost surprise and joy. I'm sure you know it's surprise to win, but the look on your face says a little bit of both. And of course, Gage kind of shaking his head, looking like he's upset at himself for losing, which I'm sure he is. He's a competitor. He wants to win too.
Yeah.
So
I saw a smirk on his face. Like it was almost like a fair play.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, if you look at the list of people that have beaten Gage in a sprint, it's a very short list because he's tactically a very good racer. He's a strong sprinter. He can really turn up the power. But I think with this weekend, I had experience where I've raced this race a number of times and I've come into the sprint with a number of very fast racers. I've sprinted against Jeremy Powers for the win on this course. I've sprinted against Stephen Hyde on this course. I've sprinted against a couple other people because it is that grass crit style course where it may be harder to get away. And more often than not, you see groups coming to the line in that sprint. So how do you time that sprint? That matters. That little bit of experience matters. And I felt like I was able to take that experience into Sunday's race. So Gage actually pulled a very good move with half a lap to go. I led through go. I felt like I was able to hop the barriers faster than Gage. I had a little bit of an advantage, maybe a couple bike lengths coming off the barriers. I went into the first wood section where I tried to open it up. Gage was able to stay on my wheel. Then with a half lap to go, we're coming into a steep ride up, this deep-seated power climb where we're coming back up the hill for a couple of technical turns on the top of the hill. Gage was able to pass me on the outside leading into this power climb. So in an instant, things changed where I thought that I could lead into this power climb. Gage had a very nice pass on the outside, so he was able to dictate the pace there. And I couldn't pass him for another 20 seconds or so, or 30 seconds. So I had to immediately say, all right, I got to back off a little. I need to give him space because this deep-seated power climb, if I'm immediately on his wheel and he fumbles, I'm going to be jammed up in his wheel. I have to put a foot down and he could still keep going. He can kind of stall out and then create a gap of 10 bike lengths and win the race instantly. So I needed that's that experience part of this where I gave him a couple extra bike lengths where we both were able to ride this hill cleanly. He didn't stall. I didn't stall. I came out of that section right on his wheel. I was in a good gear by the top, and I held his wheel all the way through the top wooded section. We dropped down off the steep drop, and we're about maybe 500 or 600 meters from the finish at this point. We come onto the pavement, and he sits up slightly. And it was that one moment of hesitation where I had to jump on it. And that's a 500-meter sprint is a long ways to go. But in the last 500 or 600 meters, you had 7 turns. And that kills a lot of time. So that there's plenty of coasting time in the last 500 meters where you're able to dictate the pace, kind of kill a little bit of time, but you need to protect the inside of the corner. So that was the lines I was taking through most of the race. I had to alter my lines on the last lap to protect my position because I know that Gage is a very savvy racer. He's tactically a very good racer, and he was fast enough to shoot the gap if I left the door open. So I couldn't give him that opportunity, and then the last couple corners, it was fighting to win these corners. And, from the last corner to the finish line, it wasn't that long. So I was able to hold him off for that, just for that little bit. And I was very excited to take the win because, as I said before, the list of people who have beaten Gage Hecht in a sprint that's a short list. So, he's a great competitor. He's a great sprinter. He's a great racer, and he rode a very good race, and he did have me on the ropes. But I think that, tactically I was able to bring a little bit more experience because this race and this course specifically, it just races a certain way. So you need to kind of have that experience and bring those experiences into it.
Awesome. Sounds like a great race. Wish I could have seen it, but I'm really glad we get to hear about it from your perspective. And you have a course preview video up on YouTube, so people can check out.
Not from this weekend.
But you don't from this weekend. You usually put them up.
Well, so here's the thing. I've been on, traveling on the road for the first 6 weekends of the season. I had my packing list. I had all these things that I brought. And then this is really the closest race that I've been to home. I was relaxed. I was sleeping in my own bed the night before the race. I got in the car at 10 in the morning, drove very casually to the race. I had my rice and eggs in the car. It was a nice, easy morning. I had breakfast at home, and I forgot my GoPro at home.
Curtis.
See, it was almost
It's a
too
lousy
relaxed.
excuse. Yeah, come on, man. This is a weekend we need a course preview. We can watch the race. We don't know what the course looks like if we're not there.
I know. And you know what? There are quite a few people who've been asking me. For all the people who've been watching the course pre-ride videos, I really appreciate the feedback and your views and just sharing. I love sharing my passion for the sport and my knowledge on some of these courses. And I wish I did do a pre-ride from this past weekend. But this coming weekend, we'll be in Falmouth. I'll look to have one up this weekend. But yeah, it was I was almost too comfortable staying at home.
All right, well, good, because then I didn't miss it. Because I was thinking as you're telling the story, like, man, I should have watched the pre-ride video. I usually watch them, but I didn't see it pop up, and I didn't think to go look for it. So I guess I feel a little better that you didn't put one up then.
Well, if you keep your eye out, Tom Parsons from Dirt Wire does a lot of the video content for the New England Cyclocross series. I'm sure I saw him running around getting some interviews and getting some race footage. He had a GoPro on a couple of the bikes, so I'm sure you'll be able to see some awesome content and videos from the Northampton weekend. And he also will do the work for the race, the Really Rad Cyclocross Fest in Falmouth this coming weekend. So they always do a good job trying to cover the race and provide media and content around the racing, because there's some really exciting races. And on the women's side too, we saw Canadian Ruby West coming out of her short-lived cyclocross retirement to come back to racing, and she's done well at the Northampton race for a number of years. So it was exciting to she's over the last few months shifted her focus more towards the track, but it was really cool to see her coming back to cyclocross, to a race where she's had a lot of success. And yeah, that was an exciting race too on that side.
Cool.
Both days.
Speaking of exciting races, European Championships were this weekend. Did you manage to catch some of those?
I did. I watched all four. And
you watched all four?
I did. Well, it was there was some really exciting racing. There were a lot of podcasts around cyclocross are a bit more sensitive about no spoilers. They don't want to spoil the results, but I think we're not gonna go that route. We're gonna
talk about it. We're gonna talk about it.
Exactly.
It's Monday as we're recording this. It's gonna be Thursday by the time we publish.
If you haven't caught it by then,
by Thursday, that's your problem. And I haven't. And to be fair, I haven't seen the U23 races yet. I usually watch.
So I'm gonna spoil it for you now.
One a night, so you can spoil those. I watch the elite races. I watch the women's on Saturday, men's on Sunday. I always watch them in the evening. I never watch them live. And then I'll watch the two U23 races over the next couple of days. So, but you can spoil them for me, and we can talk about the ones that I saw too. But I thought there was some really fun racing. I really enjoyed what I saw.
I'll say right now that the most exciting race from the weekend I thought was the under-23 men.
And that's mine. That's on my schedule for tonight. So I'm going to watch it tonight, but you can tell me about it now.
But I mean, it was really cool to see Dutch sweeping all the under-23 and pro races. Really exciting to see. Sharon Van Androoy with the under-23 women, Lucinda Brand with the pro women. Just really strong, dominant rides from those riders. It was really cool to see. Again, for the American fans or North American fans who are wondering, where was Clara Honsinger?
That's all right.
She was taking a recovery day. Actually, no, she wasn't taking a recovery. She was probably training hard. She was probably out for 4 or 5 hours, getting in the work, and then was able to sit on the couch, go through a recovery process, and watch on the TV, which is, it's always a nice routine when you're able to get everything done for the day and then finish the day watching some awesome cyclocross racing.
Right.
But yeah, the under-23 men I thought was the most dynamic, exciting race, and it had everyone on their seats too. The pro men, with Lars van der Haar at the end, I thought Quinten Hermans had a very strong race. And there was a point where I thought he was going to hold off Lars, but Lars really, he knew how to pace the course. it seemed like over the course of the weekend, the course deteriorated. It got a little bit heavier, and Lars was able to use his experience, be composed, and pace the course well. It was that dynamic of at what point do you race your competitors versus when do you race the course? And I
That
think
race was so good. That
he
was
needed
so fun.
the entire Belgian team were focused on racing each other.
Mhm.
Well, Lars had the experience and composure to say, I need to race the course before I can race the other guys.
Yeah, I loved it. I was rooting for Lars just because he was the underdog, so to speak, or at least the outnumbered with against all the Belgians. And usually when I'm watching bike racing, if I'm not really attached to somebody who's racing, I'm usually rooting for the person, that underdog, just because I think that's kind of a fun component. But one of the things that struck me that I kind of wanted to ask you about is the national pride that comes with the Euros and the World Championships, where we go from our trade teams to our nations and the switch there. I think there's something really unique there. And we saw it with the men's race in particular, where you had this large contingent of Belgians, and then you had basically Lars van der Haar, who ends up taking it from him. But he's sort of the only other guy in the mix for the most part as the race dwindles down. But my question is this: we have these trade team situations, right? So early on, I was wondering as I'm watching, it didn't end up playing out this way, but I'm wondering, like, if Toonart is racing late in the race with Lars, is his allegiance to his country or to his teammate on his trade team? Because I would think that if I'm in that position, I would rather my buddy who's racing on my trade team for 99% of the season be wearing that jersey all year than somebody who happens to be the same nationality but is on a different team. Like, I would think that would be a better advantage. But it seems that the national pride for cyclocross, particularly between the Belgians and the Dutch, are such a huge, deep, long cultural rivalry that it's almost like that goes away. And they're just going to make sure that they can try to get a Belgian to win in that case. And they seem to race it that way. And that seemed to be the storyline that Powers and Marty were talking about as well. But I couldn't help but think that, like, why would he not? And it didn't matter in the race in this particular instance, but I kept wondering, like, why would they not favor their trade team over their country in that situation? Can you give me any insight into the culture and how that works?
I think what you're touching on is probably the age-old controversy in Belgian Dutch cyclocross culture. This is an issue that's been going on for a very long time. Like, if you, the story that comes to mind is, well, what I will say is that, you would want your teammate, your trade teammate, to have that jersey, because especially the European Continental Champions jersey, it brings that prestige and that value where, that'll bring in more sponsorship dollars, more exposure, and more opportunities. But it's also, with World Cups or a World Championship, I believe you get an extra starting position if your country gets that continental. So if your country wins a continental championship, you get an extra position for a World Cup, I believe is the rule. But again, where is your allegiance, to your trade team or to your national team? And I think the age old story is with the 2000 World Championships. I think that age old story of this rivalry between trade team versus national team, it kind of, the story that comes to mind is the 2000 World Championships in Saint-Michel-Gestel, where it was Sven Nys and Richard Gronendahl were teammates on Rabobank. And all year long, they were just going at each other where, there are teammates, but they're not racing like teammates. They both wanted to win. They both wanted to win, in the Super Prestige and the World Cups. And their trade team rival was Mario de Klerk. And he would sit in the sprint. And there are a number of races where Mario de Klerk was able to beat the two Rabobank riders just because they're just going at it, racing each other like they aren't teammates. And the story goes, actually, there's a really good documentary on YouTube. You can find it. It's in everyone's speaking Dutch, but now you can get subtitles for it. If you search on YouTube, cycling documentary, Belga Sport, Belga Sport, Sven Nys. There's the Belgian sports media. They do a really good series on a number of top Belgian or Flandrian athletes. And this special was on Sven Nys, kind of the cannibal from Ball and his progression through his career. And one of the stories that they share is this 2000 World Championships where Richard Groenendahl, Sven were on the same trade team, but Groenendahl is Dutch, Sven is Belgian. So for the World Championships, Sven is teammates with Mario de Klerk. So there's that national pride. We want Belgium to win. But both Groenendahl and Sven got orders from their trade team saying, we need to have Rabobank on top. We can't have this rivalry. So on the first lap, Groenendahl attacks. And Sven, with the orders of his trade team, says, I can't work. I'm not going to contribute to the chase. And lets Mario do all the chasing. And it was an emotional scene where Mario his hands are in the air. He's very emotional during the race, and he's asking why Sven isn't chasing, and the crowd is booing Sven. So that was a race where Sven felt like he got burnt by kind of that national pride, where he was looking out for his trade team interest because he felt like he would lose his contract. And Groenendahl ended up winning the race. He played the good teammate part, but everyone booed him. So there's an interesting dynamic. So he lost out on the spoils of the World Championships and that national pride. So there's still, you can talk to cyclocross fans in Belgium still to this day that despise Sven Nys because he's a traitor to his country. He puts money over his national pride. And it's so funny to see that dynamic. But at the end of the day, it's the trade teams that are signing the contracts and are offering those opportunities, or those are the bonuses that you're fighting for. So it's a very unique dynamic. And there were a couple criticisms that I did see online where it seemed like for the under 23 race and for, in the pro men, it was a little bit, you saw Lars at the end was the strongest rider, but in the under 23 men, you saw that there was this dynamic with a couple laps to go. You still had a group of 10 or 11 riders. The Belgians had the vast majority, and there were opportunities to put a Belgian on the top, start launching one rider at a time, because I believe there were only 2 Dutch riders. There was British rider Cameron Mason that was there, and an Italian rider. And the Belgians had the vast majority, and they could have played those tactics if they wanted to. But it's also, there are a number of riders from different teams, and they all want to win. So the podium was Ryan Kemp, the Dutch rider. He played a very good tactical race. Niels van der Putte was second. He played a very good tactical race, and Thibaut Nys was third. And so it was kind of this upset for Belgium. So at what point do you put the national pride in front of your personal trade team interests? I don't know, because that's a dynamic we don't have in our Pan American Championships, where cyclocross is unique with the Pan American delegation or whatever. With cyclocross, we race for our trade teams, and the vast majority in the field are Americans. We have a couple Canadians. We always get 1 or 2 riders from Mexico or Argentina or other nations, but the vast majority are Americans. And if we only did teams by trade teams, the fields would be much smaller. If you look at the Pan American road races or the track or the mountain bike, they're broken up into country, but with cyclocross, they're not. And that's where we are with the sport of cyclocross right now. So we don't have to deal with that dilemma for our Pan American Championships.
It would be kind of cool. We should, if they started doing it, because then the Americans could get on front and act like they're Belgian for a day at the Pan American Championship. But you have this big contingent of Americans making sure none of the Canadians or the Mexicans were able to stay into it before you start battling each other.
Yeah. I think that would be interesting to have everyone gang up on Michael Van der Ham.
Poor Michael Van der Ham, right? It would be funny, right? And then if he won, though, then it's a great story too. He beats the odds just like Lars van der Haar. It's a great story. It makes you want to root for him for sure. Do you ever see? I mean, you guys see that in the World Championship, so obviously you represent your countries there. Do you ever see that changing, where the trade teams would be represented in the World Championships or the European Championships? Or you think that that's just too ingrained in the culture to ever give it up?
I think that's the structure. It's part of the culture. It's the European Championships and World Championships will always be broken up by country.
It is cool. I kind of like it. I like that aspect of it because of the pride that's entrenched in it. That I kind of watching the European Championship and thinking about that a little bit more this year. I kind of felt like a bigger appreciation for that of what it means to race cyclocross, or what it must mean to race cyclocross in Belgium. and the Netherlands when it's so deeply entrenched in their culture that they're taking that kind of pride to where they'll throw off the trade team alliances to beat the crap out of their buddies from another country to do that, which I think is pretty
well,
cool.
I mean, imagine if, we did that with football.
Yeah.
Everyone had to get for the world championships, for the Super Bowl, they had to give up their trade teams and represent their country.
Right.
I mean, there would be this massive imbalance internationally, but it's, I mean, I think there's something to it. And I mean, maybe it helps globalize the sport and get more countries' flags involved. I don't know, but it definitely is. It's a unique dynamic that they don't have to deal with for the other 40 races of the year.
Yeah, I think it also gave me this higher level of respect for what they've done with the sport. And we always have these conversations about sort of like having an American version of cyclocross and featuring what we are as Americans and not trying to define ourselves by Europeans. And that happens a lot in bike racing in general, especially on the road. Like, are we always chasing what it means to be European or not when it comes to bike racing? But I think we owe it to them a little bit to make sure that we're kind of being a good player in that equation, in that culture, because they have put so much into developing the sport generationally. And it kind of gave me a little pause on that to say, maybe at times where we're pushing to say, hey, we want to Americanize the sport a little bit, we should be saying, hey, we need to assimilate into their version of the sport a little bit more, because they built it and they did so much for it in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see what you're saying. At times, maybe yes, but I think it's also, their structure works really well, but also there's this cultural aspect where just culturally cycling is just more popular than here in the US. You just see the layout of cities are just, they cater much more to the pedestrian or to the cyclist rather than to the car. Everything is so auto-centric here in the US, where you have really cool pockets. If you go to some place like some cities in the Northeast, or to a city that comes to mind is Boulder, Colorado, right? The amount of bike paths and trail systems and networks that are around there. And then you have the Boulder Junior Cycling Group that is able to kind of capitalize on that culture in that city. And they have this hot pocket of cycling where you have this infrastructure of this junior development program. You have different teams, you have different races, and it's very centric around Boulder. That's a cool system. And I think that you have hot pockets all throughout the US that can kind of use a similar model to that, where, I mean, here in New England, I'm thinking about the history of the New England Cyclocross Series, right? For a couple of years, it was the Northeast Cyclocross Series when it absorbed the New York Supercross race. But that structure for a race series, for a community, for a development pipeline, it's very unique to kind of think about and talk about, because that was, I feel like I'm a product of that development pipeline, where we had 5 or 6 weekends throughout the season. We all knew where the races were. They had kid races, they had the Cup Juniors, they had organized 15, 16s and 17, 18 events. There was this pipeline going into the elites. You had large fields for the amateurs. You would have consistently over 1,000 people a day racing at these events, and they're community oriented. Like, there was that scene that was really cool. And I think that when we have a structure like that, that's something we should really kind of appreciate, whether it's, yes, there are some European influences, but it's also, we need to make it our own thing to work for our own communities. I don't think that, we now have the USCX series. So it's this new series that we have, and we need to cultivate it to what works best for the US scene. How do we get US racers to a higher level, US sponsors and brands involved with this US series? Because we do now have a global audience for it with GCN now able to broadcast those races. If you haven't watched those races, I suggest you go back to GCN. They're saved on there on their race TV. You can go back and rewatch the races. There are some really exciting races happening. But we have to make it work for the US cyclocross scene. It's cool. It's early in the season. We have European riders coming in and able to make it exciting. Vincent Bastens came in, and we were able to fight with those riders. And that it was a really good environment to have. But I think we need to find a way for it to resonate with people in America on a cultural level.
Yeah,
I guess. And
No,
then
yeah.
it's kind of difficult to dive into because it's just that culturally Europe and US are just two very different places.
Yeah, it's a weird balance, right? You do got to make it work here for the people here. But I think you also have to pay respect to the people who've spent generations developing the sport, especially if we want them to be invested in what we're doing to a degree. We want them to come here and race, and we want to go there and race. So in particular, and I'm speaking specifically about cyclocross at this point, not necessarily road racing or criterium racing, where you see, we mentioned the Lions Den crit, I think, in the last show a little bit, and the sort of way that they're turning things even more with the city teams and how they're playing with different factors.
Yeah,
But
that was a really
different.
cool dynamic that they had.
It's an interesting idea. That's and I know the Williams brothers are really pushing toward be more like a mainstream American sport, be more like basketball, more like football, which I relate to. I grew up in the 90s as a mainstream, sport kid, watching all those sports, playing those sports. I wasn't paying attention to cycling until I was in my late 20s. And a lot of the things they talk about makes a lot of sense to me. But when you have something like cyclocross and the influence that it's been, particularly with Belgium and the Netherlands, even not just even all of Europe, and going, okay, we got to make sure we don't alienate ourselves too much from that if we want them to invest in us. And there's something really cool there, like the story you just told about Sven and all the history. Like we got to integrate the two. I think Powers does a really excellent job on the GCN broadcast, bringing us some of those cultural perspectives too. Having been there before, like having Americans who are there and experiencing the culture and bringing it back. So it's a cool balance.
It is. Absolutely. I agree.
So what's coming up, man? Falmouth.
Yeah, so the really rad festival of cyclocross, really rad cyclocross festival, either way, in Falmouth, Massachusetts, down by the Cape, is this coming weekend. It's on it's on a fairground, so it's a pretty relatively flat course, and the soil there is pretty sandy, I recall it being, and we're looking at some rain. So that mix of rain and sand is always a really interesting mix. So maybe the course ruts out pretty good. That always kind of, seems to deteriorate the equipment a little bit more. So the pit crews may be a bit more active this weekend, but it's an exciting race. They do a really good job producing a really clean event. And it's a nice course, and it looks clean and professional. So it's the second round and the last round of the New England Cyclocross Series. They were able to bring the series back in a smaller capacity. So hopefully they're able to rebound further next year, bring the traditional races that are normally in the series back into the fold, kind of bring everyone back up to the same level. So we're able to bring that series back to the 3 or 4 weekends of racing. But this year it's just the 2.
Was it 4 before?
4 weekends. Sometimes I believe it went up to 5, but okay. There were quite a few races involved with the New England Series. It's certainly the longest running cyclocross series in America. It's a UCI registered series.
What were the other ones that were usually in it? Supercross, which is not happening, I guess.
New York Supercross was a part of it for a couple of years. Warwick, Rhode Island was a part of it. Gloucester was a part of it. Okay. There are a couple other events through the years that have been a part of the series as well. But the classic event that's been a part of it has been Northampton. And then I believe this is the first year that Falmouth is a part of the New England Series.
Yeah, hopefully they can bring that back. Obviously, a series that's more localized, and we talk about national series and everything we've talked about with the USCX, but the travel that comes out of that was daunting. Having a more localized East Coast series, I think, is super important, and it'd be great to get more of those events back, because that's always been a cool part of the calendar.
Yeah, hopefully we get those events back and it spans over the course of the season, because it's nice that they're able to keep the series going, and I hope that this is, they get their foot in the door and able to keep growing on the momentum, and things are able to rebound more for next year. But a two weekends of racing really isn't a series, and 2 back-to-back races. I think it's always nice when it spans September to December, because that's always how it has been, because Gloucester was the last weekend of September traditionally. And then Warwick was the first weekend of December. So that's, it spans over several months, and, you get varying weather conditions, whether it's 80 degrees and humid or snowing or freezing rain. Like you need to have that storyline. So I'd like to see that come back with the New England Series. I'd love to see the USCX grow over the course of the season, so it's just not this really condensed 5-week window of racing at the beginning of the season. I'd love to see that longevity kind of spread out a little bit more throughout the season. And then, of course, hopefully if we can get a good flow to the U.S. season, so it's not ping-ponging all over the place and bouncing around.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I will say it's nice to be home in the Northeast for these next few weekends.
All right, man. Anything else we should know before we part ways for the day?
I think we covered a lot, Tony.
We did.
It was nice. Yeah, there's some really exciting racing over on GCN. If you haven't checked it out, I definitely encourage you to, with the European Cyclocross Championships. All those races were really exciting. The one thing I did notice, you'll see that it was a very muddy track. But from what I saw with the under 23 men, all on a Grifo or a Typhoon tire, that mid-range tire.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. There's also some pretty nasty crashes, too.
There were. Well, they're just pushing.
I didn't see the 23, U23, both of the elite races. There was a couple that just went, oh, man, I hope nobody got hurt in that one.
I didn't see the tire choices for the elite men. But I did see that, I think, earlier in the weekend, so it was Saturday morning when the under 23 men were racing, that they had that faster tire, that Grifo. And there were a couple, actually, there was a really interesting scene where they had a camera in the pit. I think that's something that's so underrated that not enough people do this, where they have cameras in the pits able to see that action. And it seemed as though the Belgians and the Dutch had pit boxes right next to each other. And there were also the courses, it was reverse pit boxes. So normally when you're standing in the pit, the course is going, if you're in the pit facing the course normally goes left to right. But it was a reverse pit. So that you had to stand against the course, and everyone was coming in to it's kind of harder to explain. So if you just go back and watch the racing, but it's reverse pit, and it's kind of like you're an American driver, you're driving in, you grow up driving your car in America or really anywhere in the world for your entire life. And then boom, your first day driving in London. And everything's on the wrong side of the road. And you could see there was that confusion on some mechanics where you have this like motor function where you're just so used to the bike going a certain way, or the riders coming in a certain way, or looking, right to left, or whatever way you're looking. And then everything switched on you with the pits being reversed. So everyone had their backs facing the course, looking to the left, looking for their rider to come in. And you could tell that the Belgians and the Dutch had pit boxes very close to each other. And I think it was early in the race. It was either the second or third lap where riders were coming in for fresh bikes. And there was just mayhem, because first you have the two biggest countries with the most riders with pit boxes right next to each other. And then with the pits being reversed, it was like there were several riders that got held up. One person went down, bikes got tangled up, and there were people that got gapped off the group. So that was a really interesting dynamic. I think that there's a big storyline you could follow with what goes on in the pits in a busy race and a muddy race where you're changing routinely. Like if there was, let's say a Cincinnati, GCN put a camera in the pits and you could see every half lap, Carrie and I are talking with our mechanics, or where we're standing in the pits, or what are we saying to our mechanics 1 pound down, or what tire pressure, switch these tires. What gear is a rider starting their bike, like their clean bike on? There's a lot of these things that you can kind of dissect in the race. And then also just this storyline of the mechanic gets a dirty bike and they have to sprint as fast as they can, get in line for the power washers, the kind of resources that requires, the generators, the power washers, the water supply, and then getting a clean bike back. Like,
I think
that's
you
just
should
cool.
I think you should GoPro up Mike. He's been on the show before. He's super interesting. I think we should throw a GoPro on him for one of these races and see what it looks like. I think that'd be really cool.
That would be really cool.
Yeah, see if he'd do it.
It's so funny because when you see Gary and Mike in the pits, they're in the zone. The one race that always comes to my mind was Dendermonde, the World Cup. That was my career best World Cup finish, 13th. And they were in the zone. They're just like, it's kind of like you're in this flow state when you're in a bike race. It's that they're in the same state of mind in the pits because they're following the race. They know the gaps. They're on top of the equipment, and they know that they could follow you. And it's their job to follow the racer just every second that they can. But they're on it.
Be cool. I think I love the interview that you did when he was on. One of my favorites. I could have talked to him forever. Really interesting. So
There are a lot of people that said that because that was a very dense episode where it was very informative. He's a very matter of fact, and he breaks down, and that's how mechanics think. They see a problem in front of them and they try to solve it as efficiently as possible. And that was a really good conversation. Even I learned a couple things, and I've been working with Mike for several years now. So it's just, you're always learning something new with an experienced mechanic.
Definitely. Yeah. Let's get that GoPro on, Mike.
All right. Very good. Well, Tony, thanks a bunch. It was great talking about Northampton, breaking down some exciting racing, and looking forward to really rad in Falmouth this coming weekend. I'll be sure to bring my GoPro to do a course pre-ride. Also, if you're coming down to Falmouth and you're a young junior racer, I'm doing a clinic Friday afternoon, 2 p.m. Go onto their Bike Reg page, sign up. I'll be leading that clinic, so it's going to be pretty cool and exciting, and I hope you're able to come out. We may get some rain, so you'll get a little bit of practice slipping around in some challenging weather conditions on the course, and you'll get a good view of it. So before we wrap up, I want to give everyone a quick reminder. If you haven't done so yet, please like, share, subscribe, comment, wherever you listen to podcasts. All those little things help us get the word out, help grow the show. It influences the algorithms a little bit. To be honest, I don't know how those algorithms work. Tony, you probably know more than me, but it helps us grow the show, and we'd love to get more people involved talking about cyclocross and hopefully get more sponsorship involved in the show. So really appreciate you all listening up to this point. Take care, stay healthy, keep riding. We'll talk to you all next week. Take care.